those of you who don't know, North Atlantic Books is my publisher, founded by Richard and Linda Groschinger, and they're just become wonderful friends of mine, and I'm really happy with North Atlantic Books. So thank you for setting this up. This is a tremendous project that we put together, both myself and North Atlantic Books. I got some great help from the staff there, and we focused down on this really interesting mushroom, a mushroom that has an extraordinary history. It has an extraordinary amount of science behind it, but yet no books are written in Western literature on this most incredible mushroom. And I started into it about 6.5 years ago. That's when I first got into Chaga. And the way it started was I was hunting reishi, and I thought, let me get on the internet, find out what other kind of mushrooms are around. And eventually I came across Chaga, and I called the Mycological Association in Toronto and said, there's this Chaga mushroom grows in Siberia. Do you think it grows over here? Because I'd done a lot of research on the boreal forests of the temperate circumpolar region of our Earth, and it's really the same trees. So I thought, well, if it's over in Siberia, it's probably here. But the Mycological Society in Toronto said, no, it's not here. We don't know what that is. It's over in Siberia. Anyway, I continued to believe that it was probably still around in spite of being turned away by the Mycological Society. I pulled it up on Google Images and just really went out and started looking for it, and I found it. And that's how I got into Chaga, and it's been an incredible journey ever since. Chaga is an extraordinary concentrate of cosmic forces, certain forces. And in Taoist tonic herbalism, foods that are black have very high Jing, which means they're actually able to influence your lifespan. That's a very difficult thing to do, apparently, according to the great traditions in our world, from the Indian traditions and the Vedas, and also even Taoist tonic herbalism. But black foods can do it, and Chaga is black in its appearance. Anyway, this herb captured my attention, and by the summer, that was 6 years ago, 6 summers ago, we were making all different kinds of Chaga drinks and Chaga juns and eating the Chaga straight, and we just turned the juice on, and we were doing probably $300 worth of Chaga a day. It was all free, of course, because we were picking it wildly, but we really wanted to investigate just how powerful this stuff was. And that was really the beginning of this book. That's when things started coming together. And
Hey,
it's really part of my own exploration and journey. It's an evolution of my own exploration and journey into the medicinal mushrooms, which to me are absolutely amazing. They're absolutely beautiful because they're gentle, they're soft, they can be eaten by children, they can be eaten by the elderly, they can be eaten by people who've never heard of health food before, they can be eaten by advanced nutrition students, and basically they work the same way. And they're food specifically for our immune system. That's primarily what Chaga is. That's primarily what the great mushroom reishi is. That's primarily what maitake is. It's food for our immune system. So we could eat food for our muscles, protein for our muscles, for example. We could eat food for our lungs, green leafy vegetables. We could eat food for our heart, chocolate and tomatoes, but and garlic. But this is food for our immune system. And to me, that's the future. That's where we're going. That is the destiny of nutrition for a human being, is that we're going to realize that we want to feed our non-local immune system, because our immune system doesn't really have a location like our lungs have, or our heart has, or kidneys have. It's everywhere. And when you feed your immune system, then you become more capable, I believe, of not only detoxing yourself. 50% of detoxification is your immune system. It's white blood cells. But you also become capable of dealing with the crises that we see today, immunological crises, the most advanced form of that being cancer. Now, there's a great dictum in Western literature by Hippocrates, and we've all heard the first part of it, let food be thy medicine, but it is a two-part phrase. And the second part is equally as important as the first part. So let's just read it through. It's let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. It's both. That's interesting. What kind of medicine is food? What kind of medicine can you take every day? What kind of medicine has a history? And that's where these great tonic herbs come in my opinion. The great tonic herbs like astragalus and schizandra and nettles and shilajit and tulsi and ashwagandha and all these things that come from all around the world. Well, these medicines that can be eaten like food are not echinacea, and they're not garlic, they're not oregano, and they're not thyme. Those are foods, and they're interesting foods, but they're not really medicinal in the sense that you cannot eat them every day, or else they'll throw you out of balance. Garlic, you can't eat every day, or you're going to lose your job. People are going to start laughing it behind your back because you smell like garlic. There are very few tonic herbs or super herbs that you can consume daily that continue to balance you, and that are what we call dual directional. And chaga is one of them. It is one of the great tonic herbs in the world. It was in the Shen original text that was apparently put together in China over 2,000 years ago, of the top 365 herbs that were known at that time in that part of the world. And just as we've heard that maybe Chaga has a great lore and legend in Siberia, it also has great lore and legend in China. It is very well known in China. And in fact, my friend Ron Teagarden, who we just did an event together this weekend, he actually told me that when he went to meet with the medical director of the Shaolin Monastery, which is an amazing organization, they gave us Zen Buddhism. They've been around for over 1,500 years. They gave us Kung Fu. They gave us tonic herbs. They basically gave us the core of Chinese medicine. He got to the medical director's office expecting to walk in and see a million different herbs and ginsengs and bottles and all kinds of stuff, and walked in there and saw two herbs, reishi and chaga, which we call the king and the queen. There's been tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of studies on reishi mushroom. There has not been that much research on chaga mushroom, but chaga is considered equal, if not more powerful, than reishi mushroom. And what I love about it is it's the spawn of a living tree, and it's a living birch tree. And birch is the super medicinal plant of the northern temperate climates of our earth. It's a plant where you can eat the leaves, you can eat the bark, you can make medicine out of the bark. Everything about that tree helps to nourish the ecosystem. I was doing some research recently after even having written this chaga book, and it was mentioned in that research that birch is actually a nitrogen fixer. So it fixates nitrogen, it develops nutrition for the forest. And coming out of that birch, maybe one out of every few thousand, you'll see a chaga. And chaga is black in color, which hints at two things. One is already mentioned. It hints at that Jing energy, which generally, if we wanted to strictly correlate it over to science, we would say that that food is very high in zinc. Black foods are very high in zinc. Turns out that when we did the data on chaga, it is extraordinarily high in zinc. It's one of the highest things in zinc ever. It is the highest ever of anything in 3 alkaline minerals, therefore making it the most alkaline food ever of anything, according to the strict theory of what is alkaline. We read these books, The pH Miracle, Acid Alkaline Balance, Alkalize or Die. These books are hinting at a science of alkalinity that has to do with the mineral content of a food or an herb. And according to that science, chaga is the highest of anything ever found in potassium, in rubidium, and in cesium. And when I say cesium, we've probably never heard about that unless it was in a radioactive context. So I'm saying a non-radioactive cesium.
Hey,
So
David,
it's a
before
very,
we move on, we have a poll. We want to ask everybody if they've ever used Chaga or any Chaga products. So we're going to take a second and do this poll, and then once you guys have answered, we will actually turn it back over to David. So just 1 second here, we'll get started on the poll.
okay, so everybody should be clicking a yes or no and then submitting their answer.
Yeah,
We're actually going to do a few polls throughout this presentation.
we
We're going
are.
to do at least 3. Yeah, so we're gonna discover some things here about our group.
We're at 90% voted. We'll give you 5 more seconds. I think that was 5 seconds. Okay. So now you can see the results. We had 62% have actually used chaga and
That's
38%
amazing.
have not. Yeah, this is great. Okay, so I'm going to hide the results now and we'll continue.
Okay, great. Well, chaga is extraordinarily nutritious, as Maxim Analytics has informed me. They're an amazing lab, a billion-dollar facility in Toronto that started testing chaga samples and found me on the internet and called me in there to show me what they found, and ended up contributing some really extraordinary and astonishing data to the chaga book, the mineral data being the foremost in that regard. The power of chaga goes beyond just the mineral content, though. It's the highest natural source of melanin of any plant or anything, any herb in the world. And just to tell you what melanin is like the pigment in your skin. It has to do with your eyesight. It's the number one nutrient for your pineal gland. And I remember having David Wilcock in the audience, and I was doing a talk on the melanin in chaga, and then he volunteered that information that the number one nutrient required by the pineal gland is melanin. Chaga is extraordinarily rich in 27 different types of beta glucans. And beta glucans is a known, the mechanism is known exactly how it feeds your immune system. And what happens is it's something that builds up over time. And for those of you who've been tuning into the idea of Jing and Shen and Qi and these treasures that are built up in Taoist tonic herbalism, there's this idea of gaining a momentum with herbs. Now, we never heard that in the West. We heard, oh, you're sick, you got to take an herb. But what has been taught for 5,000 years in the Shaolin monastery is that no, what you do is you build up a momentum with that herb, and then it builds up a treasure for you. It's like putting something away for tomorrow and the next day and for 10 years from now and for 100 years from now, so that you gain that longevity. The beta glucans essentially comes in, it feeds your white blood cells directly. They produce more weaponry. It also heads down to your bone marrow, stimulating the production of more white blood cells from the stem cells down in the bone marrow. They then show up. The next day, you have more chaga or other medicinal mushrooms that contain beta glucans, and they get fed. They produce more weapons. They send a message down to the bone marrow to produce more white blood cells. Those white blood cells show up, and it builds up, and it builds a momentum. And then people ask me, well, what if you have autoimmune? What if you have asthma or allergy? You don't want that, do you? And the answer is yes, you do, because these things are dual directional. Chaga is a dual directional super herb. So if you are having an immunological reaction that's excessive, for example, an allergy, it's anti-allergy, it's hypoallergenic, just like reishi is. And that's a very rare trait amongst herbs in the world. There's probably only 60 herbs in the world that have that dual directional trait. And that's why we call those herbs super herbs. There's another thing that's going on with chaga, and that is it's loaded with antioxidants. It's one of the highest antioxidant things I've ever tested. It's actually second only to cacao, strangely, and it's about 2/3 of what cacao contains. That's that's higher than anything that is found in the boreal forests of the northern hemisphere of the Earth. That's number one antioxidant compound is chaga. There's another thing, and that is chaga, like all medicinal mushrooms, is extraordinarily rich in vitamin D, especially if it's dried outside in the sun, and that's how you want to do it. If you happen to get wild material and you want to dry it, you need to dry it in the sun, and the ergosterol converts over to vitamin D2. Now, vitamin D2, according to my research, is actually a little bit stronger than vitamin D3. It's a precursor form and is used a little bit more readily than the end form, which is vitamin D3. So it's a way of getting more vitamin D in the northern hemisphere of our planet, where vitamin D deficiency is rampant. There's probably the most powerful thing in all of the forest in terms of the botanical substances is in chaga, and it was first isolated in birch trees, and that substance is called betulin or betulinic acid or lupiol, and it's a pentacyclic triterpene, whatever that means. It's a really interesting molecule with 5 sides to it, and it's a triterpene, so it's a little bit bitter. It's going to actually be more alcohol soluble, and it has very, very powerful anti-mutagenic action. In fact, out of several thousand botanical substances researched, it's number one as an anti-mutagen. That's fascinating because here we have a tree that's concentrating an anti-mutagen, which is birch. It's in the birch bark, but the chaga concentrates it even more, which I find to be interesting because there's a whole story in mushroom lore that mushrooms help to suck up mutagens in the environment in order to protect the environment from those mutagens. For example, radiation. Mushrooms will suck up radioactive fallout so that the DNA of the surrounding plants and animals is not affected because mushrooms can handle it, whereas the surrounding plants and animals may not be able to handle it. So I found that to be an interesting side to this as well. Chaga is one of the highest of anything. In fact, I think it is the very highest of anything in the world in SOD, superoxide dismutase, which is a super powerful antioxidant. And there's whole books written on SOD and its power to cleanse the liver, power to cleanse the bloodstream. And here we have Chaga is just off the charts in that too. This is so interesting because out of all possibilities, just to stumble into this mushroom, it feels like there's a higher mind at work. That these medicines become available right when we need them. Now, in Western literature, Chaga was introduced to us by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his 1968 book, The Cancer Ward, his semi-autobiographical work, The Cancer Ward. And in that book, he discusses the cancer ward in Siberia where political prisoners are basically left there to rot. And what goes on psychologically, emotionally, the guilt, the fears, all of that. And they're all hoping for a miracle, and a miracle shows up, and it's Chaga. And in fact, Alexander Solzhenitsyn himself was saved from his cancer by Chaga. And that's where it first kind of penetrated into the Western mind. It took many, many years for the mycological societies around North America to kind of catch on to this Siberian super mushroom. And then it took really until recently until we realized, wait a second, it's right here too. It's grown in New England. It's all over Canada. It's growing in basically any place where birch will grow. The second thing that came up with Chaga happened in the early 90s, and that was a big turning point in our understanding of how important Chaga is, not only for us now, but also for ancient humans. And that was the moment when a couple was hiking in the Alps between Italy and Austria and saw a dead body in the ice. And so they ran back, they called the police came, they pulled this body out and found that it was actually a 5,000-year-old body that had melted out of the ice, probably due to global warming. This person, this man who was named Otzi, the Iceman, had his complete kit intact. He had his belt, he had his pouch, he had his clothing, he had his shoes. So he was a snapshot of how humans lived in that area of the world 5,000 years ago. And he had in his belt a piece of Chaga. It's the oldest piece of Chaga known. And he used it not only as food and medicine, but also to help start fires. And that was that second thing I was going to get to earlier about Chaga, is its color is not only indicates Jing, not only indicates that it's a life force enhancer and life extender, but it also indicates that it can be used for charcoal, because it looks like charcoal. It's the doctrine of signatures, and it's a coal extender, specifically. It's what that's called in the survivalist world. And the reason why you use it is because it has so much cesium in it that once you ignite it, that cesium ignites and it doesn't go out. And if you have another mushroom that grows on birch as well, called Fomes fomentarius, you could poke a hole in the Fomes fomentarius, throw the hot ember of Chaga in there. So it's a hot ember that's just, you can't put out, it's a hot piece of coal. And you can have it inside this other mushroom, and it will actually allow you to walk around with fire in your hand. And that is how humans controlled fire for at least 5,000 years that we know of, but 50,000 years that we suspect, with two mushrooms, Chaga and Fomes fomentarius. The lore about this mushroom is just extraordinary. Now, what happened in recent times is we have an epidemic of cancer, and the Russians have been using Chaga against cancer since at least 1955, kind of on the books. But it's always been known to the folk people who live out in the forest in Russia as the best thing, the best adjunctive herb to actually use if you're dealing with cancer, if you want to prevent cancer. And it's adjunctive with chemotherapy as well, because chaga sucks up radiation like a sponge. It's a tremendous anti-radiation substance. There's probably nothing like it. It's unmatched in the world. There isn't anything like it. Probably the next thing that's been researched herbally would be ginseng, but ginseng's a very far second. Okay, so the um, chagas that you find are on living trees, and there was a theory before that they're a cancer of the birch, but in fact we now know that they're not. They're actually what's called an endophytic mushroom. They live in symbiotic relationship with living birch trees and also some other trees. I've found chaga on maples. I found chaga on old apple trees. I found chaga on a hemlock. I found chaga on some pretty weird places, but primarily on birch, and they're there as a protector. They work as a immune system enhancer. The best time to pick chaga, as we put here on the slide, is from about mid July to mid November. But if you want to pick it in the dead of winter, say February or March or something, you can, but you'll probably kill the tree if you do, because the chaga freezes to the tree and would have to be cut off by a chainsaw or by an axe. It would definitely damage the host tree. So we generally recommend that if you're going to go out there and harvest chaga, you do it ethically, and you kind of keep your morals intact on just being friendly with the forest. I will leave a lot of chagas in the forest. I don't pick them all. The ones close to my house, I leave there so I can observe them over the years and see how quickly they grow, really get a handle on it. I've been observing them now 6 years, so I've got a pretty good handle on how quickly they grow, which is very slow. There is something very important about the way they grow and its importance to your nutrition, and that is chaga can be sitting outside a tree, like you see on this picture here, for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. It can actually have been there for 25 years, and therefore it's a completely different animal, so to speak, than a head of lettuce, than a tomato, than an annual plant or a product of an annual plant. Rudolf Steiner said it this way. He said that the annual plants take on the energies of the inner planets, and they have a shallower energy. The plants that are able to bark themselves over and survive through the winters and keep going and become perennial pick up the energies of the outer planets and even the stars themselves, of the cosmos. And that's what you feel with chaga. That's probably also what you feel when you have really good ginseng. You feel a depth of wisdom, you feel a depth of information that is very different from the kind of thing that we grew up with, the kinds of things we're supposed to take every day, for example, our vitamins. Chaga is actually something that probably is most doable for most of us as a tea. And it's the most wonderful tea ever. If you were able to get wild chunks of chaga, and by the way, this is all explained in my book, completely explained in detail, ad infinitum, ad nauseum, not only how to make tea, but also how to make all different kinds of chaga products. And you can see this list here, how to do wild chaga, techno-grown chaga powders, hot water extracts, alcohol extracts, everything you would want to know. But the thing there is if you make a tea, which is the easiest way to do it, you do not want to throw the material away. It can make 30 teas, whereas a tea bag might make 1 or 2 or 3 teas. It's very rich material. It's very dense material. And if you threw it away after 1 tea, it's a tremendous loss for everybody. It's a loss for the forest, and it's a loss for other people who could really use that medicine. What you do is you make your teas with it until it's completely done. It's not putting out any more melanin into the water. It really looks like it's not really doing anything anymore. You then fish out the chunks of chaga, and you dry them, and you put them in alcohol. So you get the alcohol-soluble fraction too. And the alcohol-soluble fraction is where the really powerful anti-mutagenic, as I mentioned, and antiviral elements are. It's in the alcohol-soluble fraction. So just eating the whole chaga may not be the best part of it or way to do it. Just doing chaga tea may not be the only or best way to do it. You might want to also add in the alcohol extract side of chaga just to round out all the medicine that is there, because the alcohol will draw out and make available the inotodiols and other compounds, triterpene compounds, and betulin and betulinic acid that are alcohol soluble and that would still be in the matrix of the fiber. if you had just thrown it away or just were making tea only. Now, how safe is Chaga tea? My best friend had a entire pregnancy where she drank Chaga tea every day of her pregnancy. That's a wild food. There's very, very few wild foods you want to be eating every single day of your pregnancy. I mean, you normally have to kind of change it up a little bit because there's alkaloids in foods and sometimes they can become toxic. We've all sensed that maybe with dandelion. If you eat too much dandelion, suddenly that bitter, milky material in the dandelion starts hitting you really hard. Chaga doesn't have anything like that. It's nothing at all to do with anything like that. So it's very safe. And in fact, medicinal mushrooms are safer than food. They're safer than food. We sometimes forget how toxic food can be or how toxic food is. And that's one of the reasons why over the years, going out there and educating people on raw food diets, and everybody's going out there and doing wheatgrass enemas, and everybody's throwing up because they smell people mowing their lawn, that I just had to realize I got to get, for the people that are out there, like the masses of the people, we got to get something that's gentle and that works immunologically. And yes, the raw food is great for cleansing and detoxifying your body and flushing your body and giving you a simple and natural and authentic type of food to eat, but it's not a Chaga mushroom. Just tomato, lettuce, apple, pear, cucumber, and orange are not at the depth of information and minerals and trace minerals and medicines as what Chaga mushroom is. Okay, now the story on Chaga gets even more interesting when I start cross-referencing this idea that Chaga is considered in Siberian shamanism to be the king of all mushrooms, not just the king of the medicinal mushrooms, the king of all mushrooms. And I started wondering about that. It's like, whoa, the mushroom kingdom is the Wild West of botany. There is an estimated 29,000 species of mushrooms just in Appalachia that are unnamed. So this is where we're going to be going in the future. Everybody's going to have to get into mushroom research because everything else has been found and named pretty much, right? We've pretty much got all the insects, all the plants, all the mammals, all the amphibians. So let's do a little poll. Who is familiar with medicinal mushrooms? Let's see if we can get a number here, percentage. Okay, cast your votes. Give you another minute here.
I'm seeing that 76% have voted, so we could give it another 5 seconds or so. Okay, we have 80% who voted, so we'll close the poll now. And the results are 73% yes.
Good.
So,
All right.
okay.
That's very good. That's great. Okay, so let's go back to this idea then that this is the king of the mushrooms. This has got to have some secrets we ain't ever heard anything about. And having been deep into Chaga, being a Chaga hunter basically for all these years and playing around with different extracts of it, there's really something weird going on with Chaga. It's really different. And this is my guess as to what it is, and this is something I put in the Chaga book. That Chaga, like cordyceps, is not a single mushroom. It is actually a grouping of organisms that live symbiotically together, kind of like a kombucha. Like a kombucha isn't just yeast. It's like yeast, certain types of bacteria, other types of yeast, and they live as a colony better together than individually. That's kind of how Chaga is. It's something weird like that. Now, the way we got hip to an angle on what kind of other organisms are involved with Chaga is that my neighbors were drinking Chaga tea, and they had a very interesting thing happen, and they live right off the land. So they basically use composting toilets. So you go number two in a composting toilet that's basically filled with sawdust, and then you churn the sawdust through, and the material drops through a set of gears to a bottom basin, and then that's where the material stays until you go and throw it out in the garden or whatever you do with your waste when you live like that. Anyway, from drinking Chaga tea that had been boiled, they immediately noticed that there was something coming through that was living, and it was forming filaments like horsehair in their composting toilet so fast that you couldn't run the waste through the gear system. It became too hard, too thick, too wiry, too fast. So something was surviving from being boiled. So you'd think you're going to take like a Chaga tea. Let's say, I don't really recommend boiling it, but let's say you did, and you boil it and then you drink it. You think there's no way anything could survive of that. It's impossible, right? Wrong. Actually, there's a whole class of organisms that live in the earth and to some degree also on the earth called the archaea that have been now genetically mapped, and they were mapped out by a gentleman that I first became aware of in a great book written by a guy named David Wolf. But it's not me. It was some other David Wolf. So I was checking up on North Atlantic Books, my publisher, to see if my stuff was actually on Kindle and on ebook format. And I saw there's this other author out there by the name of David Wolf. So I thought, man, this looks like a good book this David Wolf has written. I better get it. So I check out this book. It's called Tales from the Underground. And he talks about the discovery of the archaea and what it means. They're extremophile organisms. They can survive anything. They're unbelievably strong. We will never be able to destroy them. They're part of this earth. They're in the earth. They're miles within the earth. There could be a nuclear explosion on the earth, or the earth could be destroyed on the outer surface, and the archaea would still continue to live in the inner bowels of the earth. That's really amazing. So I suspect that at least one of these symbiotic organisms that's living with Chaga is actually an archaea. And that is not too far-fetched because something similar to that has been found with cordyceps. So not to belabor that point too much, what I wanted to get to is that Chaga, because it's king, has many, many different kinds of angles of what it can do. Not only can it be a cold extender, not only can it be used as a tea or a medicine internally, it can be used externally. It can also be used, you can carve out the middle and make a drum out of it. It's absolutely almost like a world-class, first-class snack when you dry it like popcorn. So for example, if you shave the little black parts off outside, and I have a wood-burning stove in my house, and you can see that on the back cover of the Chaga book. You can see my wood-burning stove. And right where those Chagas are, by the way, on the back cover of my book, if any of you have it right in your hand right now, I put the little pieces of the black material that I just kind of shave off of the Chaga, and then dry it on my wood-burning stove, and then throw it in a bag, and then kind of chew on that. And it's like popcorn. It's outrageous. And it's medicine. You can feel the betulin. You can feel the betulinic acid and the luteol in it. And again, if you've been following what I'm saying, that's where the real anti-mutagens are. This is a food that we need for today. And the reason why we need it is because of the amount of mutagens that we've dumped into the environment. I referenced earlier about this idea that the mushrooms suck up mutagens. They suck up radiation. And there's a historical idea here that has been turned around in mycological circles for hundreds of years. And that's the idea that mushrooms aren't from here, that they come in here to help life get going, to help build forests up, to trade with plants and get energy for minerals. The mushroom gives the mineral over to the plant. The plant has this chlorophyll up in the sky, so they pass down a sugar and they give that energy to the mushroom. There's a little bit of a symbiotic relationship between mushrooms and plants. Anyway, the mushroom from outer space idea definitely is something that comes up when you've been playing around with Chaga. Jing energy, which is the black energy, is mostly what you see when you go out in the night sky. It's all black. You see little stars there, but most of it's black. That's the primordial essence. That's the longevity, actually, the longevity principle of the universe, according to Taoist tonic herbalism. That then is turned inside out. And on this planet, instead of seeing all black and with a little bit of stars, we see the opposite. We see everything is all colored with a little bit of black that sticks out here and there. Again, that's the Jing idea, which is a kind of a symbol telling us, it's giving us a little bit of a clue. The cosmic principle of mushrooms are from outer space is essentially this idea that the mushroom's goal is to develop forests, because what it's trying to do is get all that levitational material out of the earth. And we're so brainwashed by science, we don't even realize that a tree has levitated itself up, in the case of a redwood, hundreds of feet into the air. There's actually some eucalyptus here in this county where I'm at that are actually almost 300 feet tall. How in the world is that stuff falling upwards like that? It's falling upwards. Gravity is displaced. It can never fight gravity. A tree can never fight gravity. Once it fights gravity, it's dead. So there's a principle of nature that we're missing, and that principle is storing and concentrating levitational substances in trees, which are the most levitational types of materials, right? The way that sap rises in a tree and falls and rises and falls is still a confounding mystery. I've read all the books I can read on that subject, and they all conflict with each other. And when you get right down to it, nobody really knows how sap rises in a tree. You get stories, well, it's the pressure, it's the suction, it's this and that. But the temperatures of the tree don't obviate that. They don't indicate that that's correct. Anyway, what the mushroom's doing is just trying to get all this levitational material out of the earth, concentrate it in a tree, then switch from a ground mushroom. And just to put this distinction out there, ground mushrooms, like the ones that come up in your lawn, can be totally deadly, can be dangerously toxic. Tree mushrooms are medicinal. That's an interesting distinction. Tree mushrooms are medicinal. And there's only one exception, because there's an exception to every rule, which is the jack-o'-lantern. The jack-o'-lantern is a glow-in-the-dark tree mushroom, which is toxic. But all of the tree mushrooms are medicinal, which tells us something about trees and forests and what happens when we lose our forests. At any rate, once that levitational material has been concentrated by the tree, the mushroom then eats that. It wants to eat that, it concentrates it into its spores, and then during a highly energetic event, which maybe happens once in a few minutes each year, which I've observed before, which is a trip to see, a polypore, or a tree mushroom, that's what they're called polypores, will squirt out or spew out its spores, and they float up into the air like smoke. They go up because they're levitational. And through the Coriolis forces, through the way that the winds move in the upper atmosphere, some of those mushroom spores, which are as electron dense as a metal, can get up and actually get out of the atmosphere, obviously wanting to fall into the sun. Like the tree is really trying to fall into the sun. And some of them miss the sun and get slingshot out into the furthest reaches of our solar system and then off into the galaxy. And so the Earth is producing biological material that can survive the vacuum of space. And I had to put all that research into this book, so it's in there in case you are wanting to do a little research on that yourself, because I think that is an absolutely incredible idea. That instead of this dead universe idea that we've been fed by Carl Sagan and Cosmos and all that nonsense, how about a living universe where there's living spore material actually out in the ethers that's out in outer space, that is traveling from planet to planet, bringing you information, and basically, this is the key idea, allying itself to life. Chaga is an ally to life. It's your ally. It's your friend. Chaga is a friend to all life. You'd think, okay, maybe I could take Chaga, powder it up, feed it to my dog. Can't do anything to my dog. Absolutely you can. Feed it to my cat. Sure, it'd be great for your cat. It's completely non-toxic. It's an amazing thing in that regard. It doesn't smell at all like a mushroom, too, and that's also very interesting because some people do have mushroom allergies, but that mushroom allergy is always associated with the particular odor of the mushroom, that mushroomy flavor and odor that we all detect. Chaga doesn't have that. Okay, now I've gone through a very long run on the history, legends, lore, and a little bit of the science of Chaga. There is another thing I wanted to say here, and that's the recipes. I put in this book a lot of unique recipes. Basically, from the mineral analysis of Chaga as compared to cacao, they're a perfect fit for each other. It's an amazing, perfect fit. When we did the mineral analysis of Chaga, it was like hand in glove, exactly what cacao doesn't have, Chaga does have. And people stumble into that. It's an intuition. They just want to do chocolate drinks with Chaga as the base. And Chaga tea, hot, it then becomes the basis for a hot chocolate. So we put that whole thing in here about how to make hot Chaga chocolates. Say that 3 times backwards and out loud. So that's a big part of this book as well, and also how to take the Chaga the different directions. How to ferment it. You can ferment it in a Jun culture, if you know what that means. How to take it down in tea. How to use other parts of it. For example, when we make our Chaga torte, we'll just use whole raw Chaga powder. Or it's actually our wild Chaga cherry torte. We'll use whole chaga powder as part of that tort. I love that recipe, by the way. That's one of the first ones we developed with chaga all those years ago. Okay, let's talk about, or let's do a poll. How do you like to consume your chaga? Who's doing it as tea? Who's doing it as extract tincture? Who's doing it as powder? Who's taking chaga medicines? And when we say medicines, we're talking about some of the encapsulated chaga products that are out there. So let's do a little poll. See if you can vote.
So David, we're going to move on to the Q&A in just a minute so we can keep to the time here. We've got lots of questions. We actually have 23 questions. So
Great.
we're looking good. Okay. Okay. So keeping in mind that not everybody in attendance has actually used Chaga, I'm going to end the poll in about 5 seconds. Okay. So looks like people are using it mostly as a tea, 61% as a tea.
Okay, great. Now, people ask me when you fish the tea out, right? You've thrown it in tea, made the tea. You've got little chunks in there that you've used. When you fish those out and dry them, what kind of alcohol do you use? And the answer is just use vodka because it's easy to remember and it's simple. And just throw it in there. That's the easiest way to deal with it. And then now you have a what's called a chew. It's basically an alcohol with an herb mixed together. And then if you want to, you can dilute that down into a tincture. Those instructions, by the way, are in the book, exactly how to make those kinds of tinctures. But also, if you are somebody who likes to drink alcohol, now you're drinking, now you've got something else going on with the alcohol. This is the thing that's always blown my mind. I'm not a drinker, but it's always blown my mind how many people drink alcohol and don't get any medicine with it. It's like just put your herbs in there, and you're still getting the alcohol. You'll still get that, but at least you get some medicinal back end benefit. Okay, that's just a pet peeve I have. Anyway, we've got a lot of questions. Let's just fire right into it.
Okay, so we have the first question from Catherine is, how many years does it take for the chaga to regrow? Should we be careful and responsible for the way we harvest it?
The answer is yes. You should be careful and responsible. Out of 10 trees that are around my house where I've harvested chaga off of and observed them over the years to see what happened, two of them died. Two of them died. I don't know if they died as a result of me picking the chaga off of them, but they did die, and I definitely took note of that. So it's possible that if you remove the chaga, it weakens the tree. I suspect that's true because the chaga is a prana concentrate. So if you see a real big chaga, you may not want to remove it all. Just take a chunk and leave the rest.
We're going to move on to Esther's question, which is, I would like to know if there's anything else growing on a birch tree that I might mistake for chaga. I'm pretty sure I have found it, but need to check that it's not anything else. It's black outside and orange inside, and looking at the photos on David's book, I'm pretty sure that that's what I have.
It could be a chaga. It could also be a phalinus. The phalinus genus of mushrooms has very powerful anti-mutagenic properties as well, and is very powerful adjunct with chaga. They go well together, and I've seen them growing on the same tree. In fact, I put a picture of that in the chaga book. The way you tell the difference is that the phalinus is like all other medicinal mushrooms. It has a bottom. It has a porous surface, whereas chaga is not really a fruiting body with a porous surface on the bottom. It's actually a herniated mycelium, which that's another very bizarre thing about chaga. Every other medicinal mushroom that grows on a tree has a top and a bottom, except for chaga, which is basically the part that normally you would have in the tree gets squished out of the tree. So when a mushroom is growing in a tree, most of the action is happening in the tree. It's not the part you see that comes out. The part that comes out is a fruiting body. All the mushrooms we've picked over the last several thousand years have been, for the most part, fruiting bodies, with the exception of chaga.
Okay, and this question is from Ben. He says, do you feel that any beneficial properties of chaga would be lost if it were steeped and then used in baking? So chaga bread, or maybe at least used as water for some chaga oatmeal.
Me personally, no. No, chaga is too powerful. It can survive being boiled. I mean, it's like it's space food. It's cosmic food. And the answer is, yeah, use it. And if you're going to bake something, use Chaga in it, absolutely, because Chaga is like a flour. When you crush it to a powder, it's like a flour, and that's why we use it in our Chaga wild Chaga cherry tort.
So this question from AJ might be my favorite of the day. I have to tell you, is it true that you can smoke chaga for benefits? How would you go about doing that, and is the experience worth it?
Um, I've done it. I heard you could do it, so I did it just to see what would happen. Um, the chaga is a coal extender, so it's always been used to keep the fire going historically in the northern hemisphere of the earth. And therefore the vapors of it have been breathed in and have somewhat of a little bit of a lore behind them that it says is good for you. The ignited cesium that is present in that vapor is probably very good for you to breathe in, actually. And it's you definitely don't want to breathe in the cesium that's coming over here from Fukushima that's radioactive, and one displaces the other, by the way. So if you have enough Chaga in your system, you won't absorb any radioactive cesium. Just like if you have enough iodine in your system, you won't absorb radioactive iodine.
Okay, so here's a really great question from, I think it's Jorgen. When you take other mushrooms like reishi and shiitake into consideration, should I forget these and just go for chaga, or is it wise to also add these to my diet?
I think it's wise to add all the medicinal mushrooms to your diet, the top 24 to 25 medicinal mushrooms, which for the most part are tree mushrooms. There's Agaricus blazei, which is a ground mushroom that's considered one of the great medicinal mushrooms. There's cordyceps, which is an organism that eats a worm just under the glaciers in the Himalayas. Um, but for the most part, all the other ones are tree mushrooms. So I like having the full gamut. However, it's always based around Chaga and Rishi.
Excellent. So I think this is Jeannie asks, where is the best place online to order a powder from, not capsule? So she says Amazon sells it. Am I safe buying it from Amazon?
Amazon, I don't even use Amazon, so I really don't know. So I can't answer that question. But the best powder that I've been able to track down, I actually put it up on Longevity Warehouse. Actually, it's going up this week. It's the 100-gram wild Chaga extract powder. So it looks like shilajit. It's like a black brownish material, very fine and beautiful taste, and it's amazing stuff. So that's what I'd recommend is a powder like that, and that's just smoothie fodder, or you just throw it into stuff, and it's easy to eat and easy to mix it into things. We did it yesterday actually on our drive. We pulled over at a friend's place and just we had no raw ingredients whatsoever, but somehow we kind of put it together and we were able to get the Chaga in there, and it was amazing. It just that flavor, the intensity of it, just was totally mitigated, just totally smoothed over in that drink.
So we touched on this a little bit before, but just to elaborate a bit, Tristan asks, is there a concern with over-harvesting as more of us begin to consume chaga? What, if any, sustainability efforts are underway to ensure a steady supply?
Great. There is a concern of over harvesting in certain areas. Um, the Ministry of Resources in Ontario, Canada, actually clear cuts birch every day of the week. They're mowing down 100 times more Chaga than people are picking. So I just want people to keep that in mind. There's Chaga being mowed down because birch is a pioneer plant. It's a nitrogen fixer. And you've seen that before, where there's been places where the forest has been damaged, birch will come in and repair it and make the way for the other trees to make it in over the next 100 years right behind it. And in certain areas where the ministry doesn't want that, they just clear cut it. So every 20 years they just clear cut it, get rid of it, and there's chagas in there. So it's everything is context related. I like the idea of being very very careful with these types of things. It's like ginseng, but at the same time they're being mowed down right now. So I want to make sure we get enough chaga hunters in there before they get mowed down by ignorance.
So how was chaga traditionally used by Siberian shamans? This is from Michael.
It was used as a tea. It was used as a food. It was used as a coal extender, so to control fire. It was used to make drums. It was used as a clothing dye agent. So, for example, you could make a tea of it and then put all your clothes in it. and then dye it with Chaga and then pull them out and dry them. I've done that, and that's amazing. Um, so Chaga also has this interesting relationship with the Amanita pantherina and Amanita muscaria, which for those entheonauts in the listening audience right now, Chaga is king. And I put this in the book just for those people who could read into that. I've also put stuff like that in Naked Chocolate. Um, Chaga is a king, and it tells the joker what to do, or the jester. And amanitas are like the jester. So if you like your local friendly um, mushrooms that grow in your forest, and you're worried that they're going to give you too many psychoactive effects, or you're going to go too far with them, then Chaga mitigates it. Just to give you just to clarify what I'm saying more, I'm speaking in tongues. Amanita muscaria and Amanita pantherina are magic mushrooms that grow in the boreal forest of the temperate region of the whole world. And they grow where Chaga grows. And Chaga and Amanitas have some kind of a relationship with each other. Siberian shamans were definitely onto that, no question about that. And if you're deep into the lore of Amanitas, you'll know that the whole story of Santa Claus and the reindeer and the elves with the toys and that whole thing all comes from Amanita. It comes from the magic mushroom. But the problem with that magic mushroom is it has very toxic side effects, and that's what the Chaga mitigates.
Okay, so I'm going to combine two questions for time. We have just 2 minutes left here. Brenda and Marissa asked about tea, so they want to know, how do I drink the black chaga residue after steeping it in vodka? Do I leave the jar open to evaporate the alcohol from the mixture? And then also Brenda had asked about the best way to drink the tea for tumor healing properties.
Okay, you're always best off. And by the way, the whole cancer fighting diet and tumor fighting diet is in the book, up to date. You want both fractions of the Chaga for sure, both, not just one. So the tea, that's where you're going to get your polysaccharides. That's where you're going to get your beta glucans. That's where you're going to get that food for your immune system. It's also really powerful antioxidants, and the melanin and everything is in that water soluble fraction. Then you're going to get the lupiol and the betulinic acid and the betulin and the inotodiols and the lanosterones and the sterols. Those are all alcohol soluble, and those have very powerful antiviral, anti-tumor, anti-metastatic agents in them. And so Chaga is the best single adjunctive thing, period, of anything to cancer fighting protocol. Whether you're on the Western approach or whether you're on an alternative approach or whatever you're doing, you should look at adding Chaga in as a part of your protocol based on all the evidence, which is pretty substantial, and I think I summarized that pretty well in my book. Okay, I think I missed part of that question. What was the rest of that question?
I think you covered it. We were talking about the tumor. Brenda had asked about the tumor steeping qualities, like what you can do with
Oh
that,
no,
and then
it was the boiling off
and then
the alcohol. Okay,
right.
so what you do there is, if you cannot stomach any alcohol in your body, you can't do tinctures or anything, then you just take your alcohol Chaga. Let's say it's been in there for a year in the vodka, then you're going to add a little bit to your tea, and the alcohol has a lower boiling point than water, so it will matriculate to the top of the tea and boil off at a lower temperature. So you can actually get the residue medicines that were extracted by the alcohol falling into your tea. So you can get both fractions into the tea.
Okay, so I'm going to combine a couple more questions for our very last question. People want to know where they can find chaga. So we had a few questions about where can you find it, if you want to buy it, and what the best is, what best, or where to start if it's your first time using chaga. What's the best thing that you would recommend for someone who's a first-time chaga user?
I'd recommend two things for beginners. One is Chaga mycelium, which is really great because it doesn't actually come from a wild environment. It's a laboratory grown mushroom, just like most of the reishi products in health food stores are grown that way. Cordyceps is all grown that way, unless you're going for the real expensive real worm stuff. It's called mycelium. So that's a great way to do it because you can just eat it. It's like tastes delicious. And then the wild stuff into a tea is really, really great. And in fact, it will become the dominant tea in your life. It's that good. It just drives everything else away. I mean, you'll still probably like your gynostemma tea or maybe your green tea here and there, but chaga tea is just extraordinarily good. And you need the wild chunks in order to actually make the tea. So that's what you want to look for, wild chunks. Now, where to go? There's all kinds of resources out there. I make the chaga products that I make actually, or the connections that I have in the Chaga world, that all channels through longevitywarehouse.com. And that's not my business. It's owned by a friend of mine, but we work together and they help me and I support them. So that's a great business and I love what they're doing.
Okay, well, you know what? I have one more question that somebody wants us to ask, and I know I said we had one more. This will be the last one. But
Yeah.
Mikkel wanted to know about oil extracts in chaga. What can you say about that?
Okay, the alcohol soluble fraction usually pulls out the oil soluble fraction. So if you want to do like an oil extract, which I've done a lot and I talk about it in there, and skip the alcohol, you can get a similar type of fraction out, but you're not going to cover the surface area. It's not going to have the drawing power as the alcohol. So for example, I'll take a chunk of wild chaga, crush it to a powder, throw it in cacao butter, heat the cacao butter in a double boiler system, and allow that heat to extract into the cacao butter. You can't boil the cacao butter. You can't get it hot enough to, damage the oil. And what you do then is when you're let's say you do that for 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours, however long you can do it, depending on the setup you have at home, then you can then cool that butter down, say it was cacao butter, with the chaga chunks in it that have been extracted, and then you can just add that to smoothies later because it will harden at room temperature, and you've liberated some of that alcohol soluble fraction via using oil. Now that to me, by the way, is my feeling as to where the jing is. And there's strong evidence that that's true now. After I said that about a year ago, and then I did a whole bunch of research in the final run up to this book, that indicates that the Jing essence is in the alcohol soluble fraction or fat soluble fraction of the Chaga.
Okay, well, this concludes our webinar for today. Guys, if you have any further questions, if you want to discuss this further, check out the link that's here on my screen for the forums in the Nourish community. And the link right there, you can click on it and that will take you to it, or you can just go to forums in the nav bar on nav communities. We will continue having this conversation. We will have people here in our office at North Atlantic Books who will be monitoring the forums. So if you have any questions, we can send those directly to David. And he's a busy guy, but if he has some time, I know he'll go and check it out as well. David, thanks so much for doing this today. This is great.
It was fun. Thanks for everybody for joining us. Really,
Ab-
really enjoyed it. And enjoy your Chaga tea and have the best day ever.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. And thanks, everybody, for joining.